We have a great meeting planned for you this evening. We're going to try something new from now on. So at the beginning of every meeting, I just would like to introduce our board members that are currently here. And actually, I see some that disappeared momentarily. So let me introduce the people who are here. There is Sabina Beg, our first vice president. She's waving hi. And then you can see also Mary Young, perhaps below her on your screen. She's below her on my screen, who is, of course, my wife also. And she is our AE Conservation Co-Chair. There's Autumn Quixote there on the left side. She is our board member. She will be introducing our featured speaker today. There is Luann Dillon, our longtime treasurer, also a member of our board. There's Natasha Warwick, our AE second vice president, who will be introducing our first presenter today, Eric Anderson. And there's Robert Franzina, who handles who's our finance chair or is finance committee or our investment committee. Investment committee, I'll get it right. Our investment committee chair, and we're so glad to have him. And co-chair. Co-chair, thank you, co-chair. And I guess you're co-chair with Luann, correct? Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And Luann is also our budget chair as well. Anyway, so I just wanted to give you a heads up on some of our board members, so you get to know them better when you see them out in the field or out at Publix or Whole Foods or wherever you might see them. You can say hi. All right. So we're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen. And if you don't mind, everyone, turning off your videos. Oops. Okay, everybody, welcome to our March 2023 Audubon Everglades monthly meeting and speaker series. We're so excited to have you here, and we're excited to be here with you. We have quite an evening planned for you tonight, so let me get started. We have spring has sprung, and it's of course nesting season. I imagine for those of you who have gotten out a little bit, or even in your own backyards, you're seeing both the sounds and the sights of breeding season. Possibly you've seen some nests already, or some nest-related activity like birds mobbing fish crows. You've also hopefully been seeing some of the wading birds in their resplendent colors. You might be seeing some of the endemic ducks who are pairing off already and swimming off, in their little hiding places. So all this is taking place, and I'm just encouraging everyone to be conscious when you're out in the field or wherever you are, that we allow the nesting season to go on as unaffected as possible by our presence. So if you think you might be in some way affecting them by your presence, you may just want to give them a little bit further space. Because as many of you know, many of our species their numbers are declining fairly quickly, and we want to do everything that we can to ensure that they are as successful as possible during this important part of the year for them. A conservation alert. The Florida legislative session has begun. There are a number of bills that have passed committee that will be going to further committees, and then some of them may reach the floor for a vote. Unfortunately, this may be one of the worst sessions if some of these bills do reach the floor, affecting abilities for communities, local municipalities, members of local municipalities to actually affect growth in their areas. There are bills that would prohibit land development initiatives and referendums. There are bills that would allow a single business to sue a local government over an ordinance, and even while that lawsuit is in place, that ordinance would be temporarily halted. And at the same time, there's another bill that would encumber citizens from suing local governments for some of their decisions. And if the citizen lost, or if an organization like us lost that lawsuit, we would have to pay not only our own lawyer fees, but the lawyer fees of the municipality as well, basically making it very difficult for any individual or small organization like ourselves to be able to sue a local government entity. There's other bills in place expanding growth in agricultural zones, literally tripling the density allowed in agricultural zones. And these are just some of them. I encourage you to visit 1000friendsoflorida.org and visit their 2023 legislative page. Mary will be putting a link. Mary put a link in the chat for you so you can visit there. And you can see some of the bills that are in place, not only in terms of local communities, but also in terms of water and other impacts to the environment that you may be interested in seeing, and you may be interested at some point in also contacting your local legislators who represent you to make them hear your voice, how important some of these issues are to you. We have our field trip season is beginning to wind down a bit. It's getting hot. So we don't have quite as many field trips as we did in previous months, but we still do have a couple coming up, and we had a few this past weekend. We have Cypress Creek Natural Area up in Jupiter, and that's coming up on the 15th. Wakota-Hatchie Wetlands on the 17th, of course, an old favorite and great hotspot and a great place to see birds nesting. Jonathan Dickinson State Park, of course, a wonderful place to see the endemic Florida scrub jay, and back to Wakota-Hatchie again, and Grassy Waters Restoration Area on the 8th of April, a trip that I will be leading. Again, this is not in the regular part of Grassy Waters, although we do meet there, but the field trip is in the restoration area, which is kind of a combination of wetland and pine flatwood and oak hammock, which is a really nice place to bird. And the link is in. Thank you, Mary. We have some upcoming festivals. This is festival season. We just participated this past Saturday at the Natural Areas Festival at Winding Waters. There's a little photo up there on the right that you can see. We're also going to be at Palm Beach State College Earth Day celebration. That's in the North Campus in Palm Beach Gardens at the EC campus. That's on the 20th. We'll be at Okehilly Nature Center on the 22nd, and also at Wellington Promenade for an Earth Day and Arbor Day celebration. So those are just some of the festivals we will be participating in April. If you see there, be sure to come by our table and say hello. We'd love to see you. We're having a volunteer appreciation evening. You can see some of our volunteers on the page here. We're very excited. We haven't had a volunteer appreciation meeting in a couple of years, and we're going to have quite a celebration. And those of you who are volunteers, you will be receiving a notice in your inbox date soon for you to be able to RSVP and let us know that you are able to come. So we're very excited about this. Of course, as an all-volunteer organization, we couldn't do anything that we do, field trips, education, conservation, without the work of all of our dedicated volunteers. And speaking of volunteers, if you'd like to become a volunteer and share your talents with Audubon Everglades and be part of this wonderful process and this wonderful Audubon Everglades family, please go to email to volunteer@auduboneverglades.org. It's in the chat. Let our volunteer coordinators know that you are interested, and we will do our best to suit your talents with some area in the organization that can benefit from it. We have our website, if you've been to it recently, is currently under construction. You can still navigate through it, but it is under construction now. We're going to be giving it a facelift and modernizing it. I hope you'll like what you're going to be seeing soon. But you can still stay connected with us. We are on many different social media platforms. We're on Facebook at Audubon Everglades. We have an Audubon Everglades community page where you can post your own photos and things that you are seeing in the birding community and in the conservation community. You can go to our LinkedIn page at Audubon Everglades. You can visit our YouTube page and see any of our previous presentations, except one or two where the presenter specifically asked us not to keep the presentation on for longer than a short period. You can go to our Eventbrite page to see where our field trips and where our events are, our upcoming events are, and of course our website at www.auduboneverglades.org. So if you are trouble finding us or figuring out what's going on when you visit our website, you have many of those avenues also to see what is happening in the Audubon Everglades community. We have our annual Audubon Everglades membership meeting coming up at our next meeting, April 4th. We will be electing our board, our new board members. Many of them are returning and running for a second or third term. I will be running again next on that board slate. And this is again for it's our membership meeting. So members will be able to vote. That is Friends of Audubon Everglades. That's part of our charter that only Friends of Audubon Everglades can vote. And we will also vote to accept the proposed 2023-24 Audubon Everglades budget that was created by our budget committee and tentatively approved by our board of directors. So please join us next month for that very important meeting. And remember, if you want to become a member, so that you can be part of that meeting process. And again, Mary will be putting the membership link in the website for you. We have some great presentations coming up. Our photography group is meeting on Thursday. It'll be the art of flower photography, and isn't that flower gorgeous? And so these photography sessions are invaluable if you want to improve your photography skills. It's not necessarily going to make you an expert, although who knows, it might, or it might lead you on the way to a certain degree of expertise. But this is open to all of our members, and there was an email sent out, a couple of emails already sent out, giving you the information of how to join that meeting virtually. So again, that's Thursday, March 9th at 7 p.m. We hope to see you there. We have Dr. Paul Gray, who has been a long time and very important member of Audubon, Florida, and a very important member of our Audubon Everglades community over the years as a presenter, as a lecturer, as a teacher. He will be here talking about taking us on a journey through Florida's ornithological and Audubon past. And as some of you who may know Dr. Gray, he's quite the historian. He actually participates in local reenactments up in his area where he lives in near the Sebring area. So he's really a history buff, and so I can't wait to hear his presentation on Florida's ornithological and Audubon past. So again, join us next month at our membership meeting to also hear Dr. Paul Gray. If you missed any of or if you want to revisit any of our presentations and monthly meetings, you can see them on our Eventbrite page. Mary will be putting the link in there as well. And it's already in the chat. And so to see all of our wonderful presentations, both from our photography group and also from our monthly meeting feature presentations. So again, that is on our YouTube channel, Audubon Everglades YouTube channel. So we are getting to the presentation portion. I'm very excited. It gives me a chance to also sit back and enjoy. If you have questions, remember to put your questions in the chat, and you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation. If you have a question, something comes to mind, put it in the chat, and we will be sure to get to that, or try to get to as many of those questions as possible when the presentation is over. And hopefully we can get some of your very insightful questions answered. So without further ado, let's get going to our first presentation. So our second vice president, Natasha Warwick, who is a wildlife biologist and who herself previously was part of the Lake Worth working group, Lake Worth Lagoon working group, is going to be introducing Eric Anderson of Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management, who will be presenting on Adopt a Living Shoreline program. So Natasha, take it away.
Thanks, Scott. So, as Scott said, tonight we're going to be hearing from Eric Anderson, who's a senior environmental analyst with Palm Beach County Environmental Resource Management. He's been working there for over 16 years, which is pretty amazing. And one of the things I find, most interesting about Eric, what shows what a great guy he is that I asked him earlier, what do you want me to say when sorry, I got muted. I said, what do you want me to say about you when I introduce you? And he was like, I'm a pretty boring guy, but I'd like to, the story he said is that, they were building these islands in the Lake Worth Lagoon for fish habitat. And, he was kind of forced to become a birder because the birds moved into these islands and showed just how, vital this work that they're doing is. So he's one of the most passionate people about his job that I've ever met. So with that, I'm going to let Eric go ahead and present. So just make sure you're muted, everybody, and put your questions in the chat.
Oh, Natasha, that's a kind introduction. So let's see here. All right, can we see the, can everyone see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes.
Top to living front. All right, perfect. So yeah, I've been talking with Scott and Natasha about our bird program, and I did give a presentation back in October, and some of these slides are going to be the same, but for the past 20 years, Palm Beach County has been building mangrove islands, seagrass habitat, oyster habitat, and it took us a while to figure out the bird stuff. And I'm just going to kind of run a couple through some of the history. 2005, our biggest and our first large-scale restoration project called Snook Islands. We birds, American oyster catchers started nesting up shortly, actually the year after we finished the project. They were nesting in areas that didn't really seem like it was ideal nesting habitat, kind of nesting on the sides of the riprap, maybe where there's a little bit of sandy edge, gravel banks. But for 9 years there, they bounced around to different sites, but they fledged 3 chicks at the first site, 2 chicks at the next site, and 6 chicks. Again, we didn't really put much thought into this, why they were there, but we were excited. In 2014, it kind of hit us when we were building our next large scale restoration project. We left a pile of sand out there, and those birds quickly came in and said, this is great habitat. That bird habitat, that upland habitat wasn't supposed to be there. But we modified, and that island has fledged 12 chicks since 2014. Our first site that we finally said, all right, we need to incorporate bird habitat was Grassy Flats. And I don't know if Ricardo's out there today, but we reached out to him, and our partners at FWC said, but we're creating mangrove habitat and seagrass and oyster habitat. Can we really modify our plans and our permits to increase bird habitat? And Ricardo said, yes, you can. And luckily we did, and it actually worked out great with construction. Same thing, 2015, once that first barge left, pair of American oyster catchers nested on the islands, or took on the islands. We believe that the birds from Snook Islands originally came over to this island. So we believe this is our first nesting pair in Lake Worth Lagoon. And as you can see, they fledged 7 chicks at these islands. In Snook Islands, we got more materials of opportunity since 2007. This island has been probably one of our most productive islands. Again, this is our 3rd pair of oyster catchers now from 2017 to 2022. They've fledged 11 chicks. Our most recent island, Tarpon Cove, I'll be honest, we did not incorporate lots of bird habitat here, but the same thing happened. Put a pile of sand out there, American oyster catchers nested, and we went from a design feature of 0.2 acres of habitat to almost 1.6 acres of habitat. Not only have we had American oyster catchers nesting for the past 4 years, we've had black skimmers and least terns. Last year, we had over 37 adults creating 12 nests. At the end of the year, we had about 106 black skimmers. At one time, we had 80 least terns with 32 nests, all within Tarpon Cove. Just some of the pictures that you've seen over the years with the black skimmers and the least terns with their chicks. You can see them providing food for their young. They have habitat, they have food, they have everything here that they need. So since we first started this adventure with Snook Islands, we've since created 2.5 acres of nesting bird habitat in Lake Worth Lagoon. As you can see here, Tarpon Cove has almost 1.6 acres over 3 different islands. Where are we going with this? Maintenance has always been an issue. The American oyster catchers haven't been as picky about the vegetation on the islands. A couple of years ago, we started getting volunteers out to Bryant Park and to Snook Islands. Last year, we even burned some of the material at Snook Islands. Over the years, we have been spraying. We also have started to ramp up the volunteer effort of getting volunteers out here to remove the vegetation. And you can see the vegetation does pile up and the debris. We've also been spraying these islands with chemicals. We've looked at different ways of spraying salt water, getting volunteers out here. I think it's going to be a large-scale approach. Adopt a living shoreline. Just this past year, we've held about 7 different events. We've held most of them at Tarpon Cove. One of the first events happened last year with volunteers from Palm Beach Day Academy coming out and pulling weeds. And I realized if middle school students could do it, others could do it. And thanks to Natasha and Scott, in October of 2022, we had 15 volunteers from the Audubon come out and pull crow's feet from Tarpon Cove. Since then, we've held multiple events with either the Master Gardeners, volunteers, Florida Association of Environmental Professionals to get out to these islands to help pull weeds. We've had other events at Bryant and Snook Islands also. So this was a great event. Thinking back, I never really loved mowing the lawn. I never loved doing yard work. But one thing that I always did enjoy was, doing with my dad. And sometimes when you're with friends, makes something challenging more fun. This event was in October, and this was a great event. We had Natasha and Scott out there, and we were just pulling weeds and going to town. We didn't get as much as we wanted to accomplish done, but it was raining, it was cold, it was windy, and I just wanted to thank all the volunteers that did make it out, and it was a great experience. Other events that we did after treating some of the vegetation, we found that to be a little bit easier. We piled it up, and again, you could just see people having fun. Those events, we had 14, 15, 20 people. We've also done it with just 2 people or 4 of us, 2 volunteers and a couple staff. It's amazing what a couple people could do to make a difference. You could see after the king tide, you have a lot of wood washing up on the islands, a lot of plastic, and just a rake and some hard work makes a huge difference to get these islands clean. This is at Snook Islands. Again, volunteers kayaked out there and pulled the sedges. Each of the islands have a little bit of different challenges, different vegetation coming in, and this is at Bryant Park. And you could see everyone's smiling and happy and feels like they've truly made a difference. So part of this presentation today was just talking about some of the issues that we have with our bird nesting, the maintenance of these islands, and wanted to reach out to people that are passionate about the environment, passionate about birds, to see if this group would willing to adopt one of these islands and make it a regular effort. And maybe that adoption includes a couple events a year, 1, 2, maybe one at Tarpon, one at Snook. Maybe it even includes going out with pontoon boats and just giving tours when these birds are nesting, and educating people and educating your group about the benefit of these islands. A typical work day for the weeding event is typically between 3 and 4 hours, usually in the morning before it's cool. These birds nest probably from around the end of March all the way through June. So or through September, I should say. So the best part is we probably wouldn't be doing these events when it was hot, and in the summertime, we'd be doing them in the fall and the spring. We could have either kayaks, pontoon boats, or maybe even an ERM boat, getting volunteers out there. ERM has provided tools, the bags to pull the weeds and remove the shoreline. There are some logistical challenges of how to get to these islands. Tarpon Cove, there is no accessible dock, so we do have to climb a seawall and a ladder. There's a lot of bending, kneeing, lifting on these islands, and then there is no bathroom facility, so there are some challenges there. The 2 islands that we were talking with Scott and Natasha about adopting was Snook Islands. It's located just north of the Lake Worth Bridge. You could access it by kayak or pontoon boat. By kayak, we have done events there, depending on the wind, waves, tidal conditions, it'll take anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes to kayak. Typically, you would park at Bryant Park. We have about about an acre, half an acre in size for bird habitat. Primarily, we have American oyster catchers nesting there. Last year, the American oyster catchers, one nest produced 3 eggs, and they actually fledged all 3, and we banded all 3. We have not seen or have reports of W64 or 76, but W75 is still in the area, and you could go out to the boardwalk and see that bird utilizing this habitat. Tarpon Cove is along Flagler Drive. It's located just east of Belvedere Road. You could most access it by pontoon boat. There is street parking in the area, depending on if we used kayaks or boats. The closest marina to access would be Curry Park, maybe Southern Boulevard Bridge. You could access for kayaks. We have 1.6 acres of sandy habitat designed for nesting birds. This is important habitat for least terns, black skimmers, and American oyster catchers. The black skimmers and least terns really need sandy open areas. So that has really been our focus of not letting what happened to our other 3 islands happen to Tarpon Cove. Last summer, we had a pair of oyster catchers fledge or hatch 3 chicks, but they only fledged 1, U17. U17 is still around Lake Worth Lagoon, and you could spot them utilizing the habitats. Last year, I said about 42 black skimmers, created about 12 nests and 36 chicks. Least terns, 32 and 79 chicks. During the nesting season, there was hundreds of birds regularly utilizing this area. So some of the questions we're probably not going to ask now, but just to kind of think in your mind, is this a project that you would be interested in helping? Would you prefer to be picked up by a boat or paddle or kayak with a round trip? I mean, there are some windy conditions. Which island would you prefer, Snook or Tarpon Cove? Each of them have a little bit different values and components to them. How many times a year would you be willing to help? And would you want to do this on a weekday or a weekend? Just some upcoming volunteer events that I currently have planned is on March 25th from 9 to 12 with FAU and a group called Good Karma. We're going to be meeting at Munso Park and trying to get one more sweep of Tarpon Cove. And then April 13th, if the birds allow, we're going to get ERM volunteers out there. And if anyone's interested, please reach out to me and I will keep you informed, and you can maybe even join us on one of these events to see what's happening. Maintenance issues that we're going to be dealing with is we still have some vegetation on snook, so we're going to go out there and pull that really soon, so we don't impact the American oyster catchers. Grassy, we still have some vegetation management to do, and Tarpon Cove, I want to hit it hard this year with some herbicide, so we have sandy beaches available for the least terns and black skimmers. Hopefully I stayed within my time, and any questions?
Hey, thanks, Eric. That was great. So there are some questions in the chat. The first question is from Aaron, who says, what is done with all the weeds that are pulled up? Are they composted?
We've done different things. Most of the time we because initially when the event that we had, Natasha, remember it was raining and we started putting them in bags and half the sand came with it. We couldn't lift the bags. So what we ended up doing was we put a tarp out there. We let the weeds dry out, and then we put them in bags, and then really just threw them in dumpsters in our local dumpsters.
All right. Next question is from Val. They would like to know, I think it's a very good question, Val. So they would like to know what's wrong with having weeds on the island? Don't they provide shade and bugs for the birds to eat?
They do, and the American oyster catchers didn't seem to be bothered by some of the weeds, and you could even see their chicks hiding out. It's the black skimmers and the least terns where they're typically nesting on sandy open beaches. Historically, they nested on our beaches on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and they're not nesting where their vegetation is. We've impacted their habitat so much. Now they're nesting on rooftops, and I think Natasha, you could speak to this a little bit more. But those new rooftop nestings are starting to go away, and if we have too much vegetation, the black skimmers and least terns will not nest on these areas. Anything to add?
No, yeah, the black skimmers and least terns like open sandy habitat. So if there is too much vegetation, they will not utilize that area. And I will say Tarpon Cove is one of the only places, at least on the East Coast, that I know of, where you have 3 state listed species of seabirds and shorebirds nesting. American oyster catcher, least tern, black skimmer. So it's a big deal. The next question is from Jeanette Mitchell, who is interested in volunteering. She says, do you guys work with the Mang organization to plant mangroves along the shores?
We did. They just donate. We just had multiple events where they donated over 2,000 mangroves just in the past month. So we've been busy out there planting mangroves. So we're going to be interested to see how these mangroves have impacted these islands for the birds. And I think I've even learned where we may need to leave some. It's not even about all the mangroves. I think future projects, we may just be designing tidal flats, Natasha, and the group. So
I think that's a fantastic idea. And Jeanette would also like to know, would we or or somebody, would they be providing the kayaks if we were to do an event where we kayaked 2 islands?
Typically or currently has 16 kayaks. I guess that's kind of what we're working through, some of the details with Audubon and different partners and things like that, and how much is Audubon want to be able to take this issue on. But yes, we most likely would be able to participate with some of our kayaks that we have.
All right, so a couple more questions. Leslie has a question. It's kind of a 2-part question. I'm going to combine this with Val. Val has another question. So Leslie would like to know, what kind of herbicide do you use? And Val has expressed some concerns about herbicide being used, which would contaminate soil. So you could speak about the herbicide that you use and perhaps how the half-life or how it dissipates from the environment.
Yeah, you do hear a lot of stuff about chemicals, and we were concerned, and we did start off by trying to treat with salt and salt water, and it just wasn't quite doing what it needed to do in a timely manner. we're using 2% glyphosate, which does have a half-life of like every day it kind of reduces. So it is very safe for the environment. It doesn't harm the animals. It really just goes after the plants for killing the cells that produce photosynthesize. So it can't photosynthesize, can't produce food, can't grow. But we are looking at multiple options, and that's one reason. One reason we need more, if we want to stay away from chemicals, then it's even more hand pulling. But right now, the crow's foot is out of control, and the seeds are just a huge source that we need to get on top of. But if we get volunteers out there every week to pull weeds, even better.
To answer, I'm going to skip Martin's question real quick and just to stay on the herbicide chat. Glyphosate does not impact eggshells. Is that correct, Eric? It doesn't cause the softening like DEET did back in the day?
To my knowledge, no, it does not.
Right. Yeah, that I haven't. Yeah, the herbicides today don't have that same impact on the eggshells. Martin has a question. When were these islands created? So he says, when were these islands created? Was it recently, or are these islands that were altered with plants and sand?
Well, depending on which ones you're talking about, but no, they've all been created by within the past 20 years. So Snook Islands was the first set of islands was completed in 2005. The islands that they're nesting on was completed around 2014, I believe. Tarpon Cove, the first two islands were built in 2018. I'm sorry, no, were completed in 2020. And then the last ones were just completed last year in 2022. So the islands that the black skimmers and least terns were on, that's the island that we've seen the most vegetation. So we believe that the birds actually contributed to a lot of the vegetation that's on those islands.
Could be. A little bit more glyphosate chat in discussion in the chat. But if there's any more questions, out of curiosity, what color are the eggs?
Natasha?
Aaron, to answer that question, the eggs blend in extremely well with the sand. They're almost invisible when they're on sand. So they're kind of like, they can range from like a grayish color to a sandy color, and they're speckled. So they'll have like black and brown speckles on the eggs, which help them to camouflage in sand and rocky areas. That was a good question. I like that question. Any more questions from anyone else? All right, well, yes, see above. I'm sorry. Did I miss a question? Does glyphosate soften eggshells? Oh no, the inland nesting. I'm so sorry, Kevin Baker. Kevin has a question. How far inland will these species nest? And if he puts a sandy island in a lake west of the turnpike, will they nest there?
I know we tried a sandy, rocky area at Winding Waters where the Natural Areas Fest just had happened, and we did not have success. I guess, Natasha, can you speak on, is there some nesting out west in the Everglades and the STAs?
Yes, we do get nesting out in the STAs out west. They have, least terns have also nested in Lake Okeechobee in years when the water level is low, that exposes, land within the lake. So they will nest pretty far inland. However, I cannot speak to if you build a sandy island, will they come? The birds are very finicky. So I would say that's something to discuss further with perhaps a shorebird biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Commission, if that's an idea that you had. And then there was a comment about glyphosate not being safe, and it damages cells and causes neurological problems in humans. Somebody wanted to know if you could comment on that. I don't know if we have a ton of time, but if you want to quickly comment, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a expert on the chemicals. I know there's definitely two sides out there. From everything that I've read, it's relatively safe, but I think that's even one more reason why, if you're passionate about this, we can't we have to weigh our options, and what's the best way for these areas to be treated. We are partnering with FWC on an experimental project to, if it gets funded, to try different management options. But I'm starting to realize this is just taking a lot of effort to build and maintain these islands, and we have to do our best time, money, and to try to do what's best. And right now, I'm trying to use all options.
I think that was a great answer, Eric. Thank you. And then one last question slipped into the chat. Martin says, are there other islands in other parts of Florida that were built like this?
Honestly, Palm Beach County is kind of one of the few places that have really focused on this. There was one area in the Panhandle that did something very similar right around the same time as Snook, but I'm not aware of counties or state doing large scale restoration in estuarine environments. So yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of groundbreaking stuff. And when we've taken partners with U.S. Fish and Wildlife out there, they're just blown away by the bird habitat that these are creating. And so am I, to be honest.
Awesome. And then Jeanette asked one more question. Would these birds nest elsewhere if these islands were not being sprayed with glyphosate?
Rooftops.
Yeah, I was gonna say I can answer that question. You know, a lot of the least terns and black skimmers, the only places they really have to nest in South Florida where they're not getting disturbed by people constantly are rooftops that have gravel as the substrate on the roof. But you know, those rooftops are being phased out. It's an old technology that's not used anymore. So what usually happens is the birds try to nest on the rooftops first, and then, you know, get washed out by rainstorms or disturbances, and they'll move to these islands for nesting. So the islands are incredibly important in trying to maintain their habitat however possible. You know, it contributes widely to the survival of the species in South Florida. So yeah, there's not a lot of natural habitat left for them in South Florida. So sorry to steal that answer from you, Eric.
No, thank you. It's a team effort, and I think you hit it perfect.
All right, with that, I'm going to sadly close our questioning period so that we can get on to our main presentation. But thank you so much, Eric. As always, we appreciate all your efforts and look forward to working together.
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. And sorry, Dr. Beilfuss, if we took up too much of your time.
Eric, I just wanted to thank you for your excellent presentation, and you know, it's so important what does in our county, our natural areas, these spill islands, they're unique. If you go to many other counties across the state, you don't have, particularly urban counties like ourselves, you don't have this much preservation of land that you see in other urban counties. And these spill islands, as you pointed out, are unique, I think, in the state. And the fact that we have all these nesting species, particularly the fact that they are threatened species, is so critical. And the work that you guys do is just amazing. Everyone, if you think this is a great idea for Audubon Everglades to adopt a living shoreline, and you're thinking you may want to volunteer and help at one of these living shorelines, you might just want to throw your name in the chat and with a thumbs up or with a big yes or something like that, just to let us know, to give us a sense of the interest that is out there among our members and our viewers. Thanks again, Eric, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
All right, thanks, Scott, for the opportunity.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next presenter, and to introduce our featured presenter. And by the way, you know, we don't have to be off our computers at any specific time. So if you'll stay with us, if the evening runs a little longer, I'm sure that you will benefit from what you learn and tonight. So anyway, without further ado, let me give you our board member, naturalist, actor, artist, Autumn Quixote, who will introduce our featured presenter this evening.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be back, and I'm super happy to introduce Dr. Beilfuss. I was just reading his bio and my brain is full just from reading his bio. Over his 30-year career, he's engaged in water management and wetland restoration efforts in more than 20 countries across Africa and Asia, particularly focusing on Nepal, Vietnam, Mozambique, and Zambia. And when I got there, I was exhausted, but there's more. He's contributed to the restoration and management of thousands of acres of prairie and savanna landscape here in the Midwestern USA too. He's authored more than 100 scientific papers, reports, proceedings, lay audience publications, and then he's presented these research findings and conservation visions to governments, communities, peer scientists, and people like us. He's also a licensed professional hydrologist. He has a PhD in land resources, wetland ecology, an MSc in civil and environmental engineering, hydrology too, an MSc in water resources management, and a BSc in international economics. He also received the Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Wisconsin-Madison Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. He's an honorary fellow there, and he mentors and teaches the students there. And he was appointed by the governor of Wisconsin to serve on the examining board of professional scientists, hydrologists, and soil scientists. He's now about the International Crane Foundation. He served as the president and CEO and ex officio member of the board of directors since 2010. He also helped launch many of the foundation's projects and provides oversight and vision and prioritization to their conservation programs across Asia, Africa, and here in North America. And on top, if that wasn't enough, like the icing on the top of all this is that he is also an avid unicycle rider, dart thrower, and birder. However, much to my chagrin, he doesn't do these all at the same time, although maybe you should work on that. But in the meantime, before you do, I'd like to introduce Dr. Beilfuss, and please take it away. We can't wait to hear what you have to say.
All right, thanks, Autumn. Well, you could have edited that down. It would be just fine, but thank you. Can you see me okay on here? Good. Okay. Well, wonderful to be with you all this evening. If there's one thread through my career, it's big floodplains. I love working in big wetlands. I've been very privileged to work in some amazing wetlands through my career. And the Everglades is, of course, one of those amazing wetlands, which I haven't spent nearly enough time but have visited many times. And I love birds and I love big wetlands. So what better group to talk to than a group that works for birds and wetlands in a place like the Everglades. So great to be with you. A little shout out. I think we have a couple of directors from the International Crane Foundation on tonight. At least they were a little earlier, Steve Becker and Leslie Coolidge. Great to have you out here. Thanks for joining and for helping us out so much. So what I'm going to do is share my slides here, if I can get that right. And go there, and hopefully you can see a slide now with a bunch of cranes on it. Somebody let me know if you can't see that, and we'll get going here. So my talk is Cranes, Ambassadors for Conservation. And I want to talk to you kind of big picture about the role of cranes in conservation and share some stories. I'll share a story from Vietnam, one from Zambia, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Sandhill Crane story here in the US. I know that Dr. George Archibald, who is the founder of the Crane Foundation, was with you sometime last fall, maybe 6 months ago or something. And I think George talked quite a bit about his passion for cranes and about whooping cranes, especially. So I will leave his good story about the whoopers, his personal sojourn, and jump over and tell you about the other US crane, Sandhill, towards the end. So anyway, pretty much everything was said about myself. I've been I'm born and raised in Chicago and really had the privilege to work in a lot of wonderful places and work with a lot of wonderful birds, and especially with this family of cranes. It's quite a powerful icon for conservation around the world, and it's been exciting to be associated with them. Okay, let's get going. So the first question people ask me all the time, sort of 365 days a week, depending on who I bump into, is why cranes? What's the deal? Why is there this conservation group up in Baraboo running all over the world, working with people to save cranes. And so I'm going to tell you sort of 5 reasons why cranes to get us going here. But the punchline is, it's not just for birders. I know a lot of you are birders, but I talk to a lot of people who aren't birders, and I promise you the world of cranes is not just for birders. So number one, I think from those, like those words on the wall back there, cranes are ancient, elegant, inspiring part of our culture. I mean, if you just look through them, the blue crane of South Africa, the ornate gray-crowned crane from East and Southern Africa. The cranes are amazing birds. They're the tallest flying birds on Earth. Several different continents are the tallest flying bird. They have a lot of wonderful behaviors to watch. I'm hoping some of these video clips work. This is an example of the unison call. This is the Siberian crane at Poyang Lake in China. That's one of their hallmarks, is the male and female duet. They're playful birds while they're in play. And here's a little clip again of our wattle cranes at the International Crane Foundation. And again, they can just be kind of goofy sometimes. They're really fun to watch. These birds on our display, that's actually the female on the right, jumping up and down and trying to get the attention of the male here. And he's just woke up on the wrong side of the crane bed, who wants nothing to do with her that day. But watch her now. She's going to throw some. Oh, look, she's going to make a nice catch there, throw some sticks, whoever we can, but pretty fun. But yeah, nope, not that day. So cranes are also great parents. They raise 1 or 2 chicks for most of the crane world. There's one exception, the gray crown and black crown cranes that sometimes raise 3 or 4 chicks, but most of the cranes only raise 1 or 2. They are great parents. They share incubation and nurturing and raising of the chicks. Cranes also have these amazing migrations throughout different parts of Asia and of course here in North America, including the really dramatic congregation on the Platte River. If you haven't made the trek up to Nebraska in March, it is so worth it to experience now nearly 1 million of these birds as they congregate in the central part of the Platte River in Nebraska, really one of the great wildlife spectacles on Earth. Here's the kind of thing you see on the Platte, just lots and lots of cranes out dancing, and, showing all kinds of behaviors, and watch the pairs out there. Really a joy to get one of the lines. In fact, Audubon, Nebraska, Platte River there, no sanctuary funds. So worth to get out. Well, because of all those qualities of cranes, they've been with us for a very long time in our art and cultural history. This is from Utah near Bears Ears. This is a crane painting on rock out there from probably 1,000 years ago. There's a wonderful, this is actually a photo of a painting I took in Madison, but it's called The Last Watering Hole, in the Crane clan of the Ojibwe tribe of the Red Cliff Band up in northern Wisconsin. The Crane tribe, this is a scene called the Beginning of the New World, and they're consulting with cranes and other wildlife about the future of the new world during the next incarnation of the world. So again, cranes steeped in that cultural history. Over in Australia, the Brolgas, the main crane of Australia, is attributed with the creation of the sun. One of the cranes threw an egg up into the sky and it became the light and the sun. Wonderful Aboriginal story from Australia. And over in Southeast Asia, this is a reclining Buddha in Myanmar. And if you look at the bottom of the Buddha's feet here, you see a crane. And crane is one of the most auspicious reincarnations of the Buddha before the Buddha reached enlightenment. And so the crane is very sacred throughout Buddhist culture in Southeast Asia. I'll tell a little story from Vietnam later, but extremely important culturally. Over in India, the same story. Cranes are featured in the Hindu epic, the Ramayana, which is dated, a couple of thousand years ago, more than almost 2,500 years ago. And one of our colleagues in Vietnam, when researching this, found good evidence that this may be the origin of the first poem ever put on paper about the story of the sage Valmiki discovering the nature of suffering over the killing of a crane. Pretty remarkable, and of course, way, way back. Cranes feature in many, many different places. This is a wedding kimono from Japan, the 1,000 cranes at Hiroshima, and that story of peace, many of you have probably heard. And they just permeate culture. And one of the funnest the things I enjoy is just traveling the world for our projects and just capturing the essence of some of these craniest of places. This is Uganda. The great crown crane is in the center of the national flag of Uganda. It's in their coat of arms. One of the national banks is the Crane Access Bank. The national soccer team or football club is the Cranes. They're on the shilling and paper notes, and they're on the fin of their national aircraft. I mean, we're talking a very craney country here. Cranes appeared on, different species of cranes have appeared on stamps. All 15 species have appeared on stamps. I think our collection is at about 80 or 90 stamps worldwide. And cranes have kind of cracked all of the most exclusive, yuppie markets in the world. They're on teas and high-end coffees and beers and misos and sakis and wines and so on, airplane fins, you name it. They've really are embedded into our culture around the world. So sometimes we take our love of cranes a little too seriously. This is actually an airport in Zambia. We have a great crown crane as their mascot. It's a pair of cranes walking down part of the march. So maybe worldwide. So clearly one of the reasons for why cranes is their deep connection culturally with us, with people of the world, around the world, and on 5 different continents. Another reason why cranes is that cranes are actually very helpful indicators of the health of the environment. Of course, many species we know of are great indicators, including a lot of species at the lower end of the food chain that really help us assess the health of ecosystems like wetland ecosystems. But cranes as big, conspicuous birds are very helpful too. As shown here, they require really large tracts of wetlands to raise their young. So they're very sensitive to the conservation areas that they have access to for nesting. Some of their diets are very specialized. Blue crabs and other seafood on the coast is the preferred food for whooping cranes. They have to migrate about 2,500 miles each year from the coast of Texas in winter way up to Wood Buffalo National Park in Canada. And they eat a very protein-rich diet down on their wintering grounds there to make that migration. The wattled crane, a species I spent a lot of time with in Africa, they actually feed very exclusively on a vegetarian diet of the tubers of Eleocharis spike rushes. And as they feed on these tubers, you can really predict their distribution across the big floodplains in southern Africa by the currents of this plant. Where the plant grows, they're there. Where you don't see the plant, no matter how wonderful the wetland, the cranes are not there. So they really quite sensitive to this vegetation community and the conditions that grow these plants and their tubers. Sometimes being an indicator doesn't just mean natural wetlands. This is a scene from Myanmar. It's a little egg right in the center of the photo there, and way in the back you can probably barely see it as a Saris crane. And the Saris crane actually breeds in traditional floating rice wetlands of Southeast Asia. And as long as these systems are maintained in good condition with enough cover for nesting, the cranes are actually very productive in these rice fields, along with people harvesting crops. When these fields are converted into intensive industrial rice production, as has happened in a lot of Vietnam and Cambodia and Myanmar, then the cranes disappear and a lot of other water birds too. So they are very compatible with agriculture, depending on how agriculture is done. That's a theme I'll return back to later on our Sandhill cranes too. And increasingly and sadly, cranes are quite good indicators of climate change as well. These are blackneck cranes, and they breed up in the highlands of Tibetan region, Tibet and in Western China, and they breed in wetlands that are fed by glacial runoff from those systems. So as the glaciers melt, they feed these wetlands, but the glaciers are also rapidly receding from this region, and a lot of these wetlands are drying up. So along with glacial melting and sea level rise and drought and water scarcity in parts of Africa and elsewhere. Cranes really are helping us better interpret changes in our climate as well. So indicators as well as kind of big, iconic, culturally connected species. Two of the reasons we focus on cranes. The third is because of those two qualities, cranes really make strong flagships for saving places that we all care about. And so whether we're talking about in the US, some really beautiful places like the Mississippi Sandhill Crane Refuge, some of you may have visited in southern Mississippi, or Aransas National Wildlife that is home to most of the world's wintering whooping cranes. There are also many national wildlife refuges out in the western US that protect breeding populations of sandhill cranes. We've made a lot of commitments of real estate to cranes and other species in the US, and likewise, that has played out in many other places. In Vietnam, we've been involved in setting up 6 national crane reserves that protect the last remaining wetlands in the Mekong Delta. That's across Vietnam and Cambodia. So those are really critical areas in an area that is otherwise developed very intensively. And for these Saris cranes in India and Southeast Asia and all, they are wonderful umbrellas. Once we protect areas, you have the opportunity to conserve land for lesser known species that are out there that share these same lands. So they make good flagships and good umbrella species for conservation in those areas. China has made maybe the most extraordinary contribution to crane conservation in the world. There are 46 nature reserves at the national level set up for cranes. They protect more than 70 million acres of land in China around cranes. There's actually 8 species of cranes in China, including 4 species that are endangered, and really important conservation flagship in China for many other species, including most of the world's swan geese that share the wintering habitat of cranes, as well as about half of the world's tundra swans that are over at Poyang Lake. So it's really a vital stronghold for a lot of waterbird species. Over in Africa, cranes are associated with some of the many wetlands of international importance. We've had several wetlands set up using cranes as one of the key criteria as a threatened species for their protection. So a great tool for conservation, great flagship as well. And those wetlands, are home to lots of things we care about. Cranes co-occur with elephants and hippo and buffalo, and many of the species of big mammals as well as water birds and all that we appreciate across Africa. So they lead us to wonderful places. And one of the interesting things about their flagship role is nearly all of these places are people places. So these are scenes from over the years. This is from Western China, from India, from Chad in Central Africa. Many of the places that are strongholds for cranes are places where they co-occur with people. And that's one of the qualities of cranes, is that they can be flagships not only for vital places, but also for working landscapes and for the health of working landscapes. And that's a big theme in our work, as we'll talk about as I go on with a few stories here. Because of all those qualities, cranes have the remarkable ability to bring them together. We call them ambassadors for conservation and goodwill. This photo was from Siberian Crane Project that brought together people from Russia, China, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and across over in China. Wonderful opportunity to bring people together across many different countries that often don't work together for the good of this migratory bird species. And likewise, there's a Korean crane working group. Koreans don't work together on many issues, but North and South Koreans do work together along with their colleagues in Japan, China, and Mongolia for crane conservation. And they're very active across that region. And so they're a great opportunity, again, for trying to heal wounds and to bring people together that often don't have much to work together on otherwise. I love to shout out again our colleagues in China who do these wonderful productions for the conservation of cranes. China is certainly a very crane-loving part of the world, and that's always a good reminder when we're looking for common ground in these times of country bashing across the world and across Africa as well. We work in 12 different countries, and cranes are a great opportunity to bring us together across this enormous continent for the good of conservation of wet cranes and wetlands and people that share them. All of this goodwill leads to a lot of crane festivals. I spend my time running around to a lot of crane festivals. I think at latest count, there are 32 crane festivals worldwide. I'm just back from one of them down in Texas. There are crane festivals all over the world. This is a scene from Bhutan, the highlands of Bhutan, where the cranes return each year for winter, and people come out and celebrate them. These are teenagers dressed up like black-necked cranes, out dancing and strutting around, and just wonderful ways to celebrate these birds as they return. So they are cultural icons, they are indicators, they are flagships, and they bring us together. All really positive reasons to say why cranes. And there's also the other side of the coin, and that is that cranes need our help. They're actually one of the most endangered families of birds on Earth. 10 of the 15 species of cranes are on the IUCN Red List. One additional species is near threatened, and of the remaining crane species, including our sandhill cranes, there are definitely threatened populations, including your population of resident sandhills here in Florida. And so very few of the crane species are secure, and there are populations in all of these birds that are threatened. So it is a very endangered family of birds, and the reasons are all the same reasons we're always talking about in conservation. It's the old adage, how to live on the land without spoiling it. I think as Aldo Leopold might have said 70 years ago. It's wetland destruction, dams and water diversions, water quality and land use changes, invasive species, overgrazing and other uses, fires, you name it. It's the same litany of challenges we're all facing as we try to save birds and conserve land around the world. And then we have the added challenge in this day and age, of course, of increasing changes in our climate. This is just one way to look at climate change, but this is increasing water scarcity, and it highlights a lot of the hotspots that we work with in crane conservation around the world, notably Southern Africa, parts of Europe and the Middle East, and Western US, among other places where we're very concerned about the changing climate. So that in a nutshell is why cranes. This is a map of the cranes of the world. There are 15 crane species. Here in the US, we have the rarest crane in the world, which is the whooping crane, and the most abundant crane in the world, the sandhill crane. And then cranes are also across Africa, Europe, and Asia, and Australia. So that is the cranes of the world, and these are the craniacs of the world that we work with. This is a hodgepodge of places where we have offices. We have offices in 7 different places around the world. We have hosting partners, we have research associates, and many other colleagues working actively with us in crane conservation around the world. So these are our crane colleagues here and there. So what I'd like to do is just share 3 brief crane stories with you. They're all stories I could go on and on about for hours. I've done actually webinars on all of these stories, but I just want to give you little snippets of the world of crane conservation to kind of give you an idea of how they do these things. They serve as flagships, they bring us together, they help us understand the quality of our environment, and they bring us together to deal with endangered birds and landscapes. So I'll tell a story from Southeast Asia, another one from Southern Africa, and then story back at home, as I mentioned. So let's start in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam. Much like the Everglades, this is a land of big floodplains. And this is where I sort of cut my teeth with the International Crane Foundation back in the 1980s and early 90s when I started working in this amazing region, the Mekong River, where it outlets to the sea in Vietnam, the Mekong Delta. The Mekong River system is famous, especially for its really weird and exotic animals, especially these enormous fish. That lower left is called the giant dog-eating catfish. Among other species, there's a lot of really wonderful fish. There's a porpoise that is in the freshwater of Vietnam, very endangered, and all. But there's really wonderful wildlife. But also, in addition to in the river channel, Vietnam and the lower Mekong has enormous floodplains. And those floodplains are full of lots of wildlife, and a lot of this wildlife looks very similar to your wildlife in the Everglades, only different species, but a lot of the same family groups that you'd expect in these big wetlands. And the Saris crane. The Saris crane is the world's tallest flying bird. They stand about 6 feet tall. They're amazing. If you ever get a chance to get up to visit us in Baraboo, Wisconsin, you can stand face to face with one of these birds. They are beautiful and enormous. Well, the Saurus crane story did not start out well. I mean, they were part of Vietnamese and Cambodia and Myanmar culture for thousands of years. But during the war period, their main habitat, which is the Mekong Delta of Vietnam, was really wiped out. It was drained first by the French, and then the American forces drained and heavily herbicided and napalmed as part of the war effort. And then the Vietnamese, being very industrious, soon after the war, moved in and settled all those drainage canals. They settled on the dikes that were created from the drainage, and they converted very, very quickly the entire Mekong Delta region of Vietnam into one of the world's biggest rice production areas. So they converted about 2 million hectares of wetlands into rice production very, very rapidly. And this is a satellite image of the Mekong Delta with some of the river channels coming in. All of that green is rice. Some of the pink is coastal areas and mangrove, some of it that remained, and other production. But all of that is rice, and none of that was in rice prior to the Vietnamese War. So it converted very rapidly. And if you look up in this corner here, I'm going to zoom in here. This is an area close to the Mekong there that's in the center, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. It is called Tram Chim. And in 1987, an amazing person appeared on the scene. His name was Nguyen Ye. He was a colonel for the North Vietnamese. So he was our enemy. We fought against him in the war, and he was in command of troops that survived in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam during the war as part of the effort to ultimately come up and invade Saigon and win the war. And Nguyen Ye and his troops lived in the Mekong, and he gained a tremendous appreciation for these wetlands, frankly, for the survival of his troops and how they fed and sustained them. But after the war, he decided to declare one small part of the Mekong Delta as a wetland preserve to basically commemorate the value of the Mekong Delta for the troops. Now, Nguyen Ye, though, he was no pure utilitarian. He loved these wetlands, absolutely loved them, loved the cranes, loved the wildlife. He loved to stick his tongue in the water and tell you the pH of the water. He was a real marsh rat, as you'd say. He loved it out there. And he did an amazing thing in creating this little wetland reserve in the sea of rice. Saurus cranes showed up. And Saurus cranes actually hadn't been seen during the entire war period. For about 40 years, there was no record in Vietnam. They may well have been up in Cambodia and some of the farmlands where Pol Pot was running in Cambodia in that period. Nobody knows exactly where they went off to, but they disappeared. And then in the late 1980s, they started showing up in this wetland that Nguyen Ye created. So we got very excited about that. We came over and got very involved. As I said, I was working there back when I had a lot more hair and was spent more time stomping around in wetlands. And others of us were very involved there. There's an old picture of George squatted down there looking at some plants with our Vietnamese colleagues. And we worked side by side with Vietnamese from the south and the north to work towards Tram Chim, towards getting it established as a well-managed protected area. It was an exciting period of time. We committed about 20 years actually through that period from the 80s through the 90s and 2000s to protect this area. And one of the really fun things was, again, going back to the cultural importance of the Saurus crane region. This is Saurus on the walls of Angkor Wat, the ancient temples there from about 1200 AD or so. But when we were working there, we were trying to find these cranes and learn more about them. We would arrive there and we'd say, we learned a little bit of Vietnamese, and we'd say, have you seen the Seo Do Da? Which means, basically, that's like the technical word Saurus crane. It means literally Saurus with red head, or the giant bird with red head. And people had no idea what we were talking about when we'd ask them that. But if we said another word, and the word is hawk, then people knew all about these birds. They would tell us where they are. They would lead us to them, show us where they were in the wetland. Well, the word hawk means the holy bird that takes your soul to heaven. Cranes are known as messengers of the gods that move back and forth between the heavens and earth. And so that's the name and the association that people know these birds by in Vietnam. It's really a fun part of the story. Well, the work led to conservation planning for Trum Chim, this area, which means bird swamp. We've helped put in water gates and help support Vietnamese students and all to run this place, and they do a fantastic job. And eventually, it became Trum Chim National Park, and it's the largest wetland remnant that's protected in the Mekong Delta. And thanks to Moynier's wonderful vision, we were able to save this wonderful wetland, more than 20,000 hectares of wetland habitat for lots of birds. So that was exciting and wonderful to be involved in personally for all those years. But meanwhile, rice development was relentless across the floodplain. This is in about 2000. And as it continued, same scene, areas were developing very, very rapidly, further being channelized. The Vietnamese are incredibly industrious, and the areas were all going fast. And we realized we needed more tools than just protected areas to save these wetlands. So we started to look in earnest at whether the value of natural wetlands could possibly compete with industrial agriculture anyway. And we caught a break. We caught a break in an area that hadn't yet been converted fully to rice. And it was a wetland that featured a grass called leperonia. And there was a tradition in this area of harvesting leperonia and making mats and other products at the household level. And that was wonderful because it gave people a deep appreciation and a long cultural history of appreciating these wetlands and these plants. And that was good. But the mats were just at the household level, and people would spend days making them, and they would make a few cents off them, not even $1 value for one of these mats. So it was very much an impoverished subsistence level for these people living off these wetlands, but they had protected these wetlands. And we realized that there was a good entry point if we could help them scale up and produce products out of this traditional wetlands in a sustainable way. And so we started this leperonia wetland project to see if we could scale that up. And thanks to the quality of the work of the Vietnamese, it really worked, and they were able to start producing these baskets and handbags, very high quality, and they became in high demand. Actually, over time, they were able to market them internationally. They marketed to Japan and Korea, into the European Union. And we had something there, harvesting this leperonia and creating real products. And over time, we started to see some exciting things. One was that the daily income for people started going way, way up. They produced higher quality bags, they exported them, they started to earn more and more money. So wages went up, and also the number of households involved in the production started to go up until more than 400 households in the region were realizing much better income from this leperonia project. So that was really exciting. We wanted to improve livelihoods in an effort to help the people there and also generate more support for the wetland. And as well, the project would generate money surplus that would actually be used to manage, for the community to manage the wetland. In some years, upwards of 85% of income generated would help support the costs of the wetland, so they weren't just dependent on us or other foreign aid. They could actually support these activities, both the management of the wetland to maintain the leperonia and make more income. And that was all really exciting. And then Sandhill Crane numbers started to really pick up, and there were just a few when the project started. But over time, the birds were going up and up to more than 300, in some years, more than 400 birds wintering on the same wetland that was helping so many livelihoods. And then to me, as someone running a conservation nonprofit, one of the most exciting things was we were actually able to demonstrate success to the point where we could hand this off. The Vietnamese fully took over the project. They declared the wetland itself protected, and then supported the business of making these handbags, which is still going today. Leperonia handicrafts, you can find it on the web, and they're still producing and selling these. So it was one of those exclusive win-wins, and I'm very proud of our Vietnamese Southeast Asia program director, Tran Tritt, who really led this work. He got some nice awards for that, including the Equator Prize. But it's one of those kind of stories we all need. Sandhill Crane numbers picking up, increasing steadily, the health of the wetland improving with better management, local income and employment for people, and that certainly meant more support for not converting this area to rice, much like was happening everywhere else. The local province was convinced of the value of wetlands, their natural capital, the grasses they provide. And it was an alternative development model at a time when everything was going to rice. So it was very exciting for us. Like I said, we are very happy to hand off that project. And the new frontier now is this thing we're kind of calling floating rice 2.0, but is seeing if we can, through the iconic role of the SARAs, try to promote more types of what we would call more traditional floating rice agriculture that's much more compatible with wildlife, but needs to be modernized, needs to be economically productive for people. So we're experimenting with things like rice noodle production and other ways to add value to types of rice cropping that can be healthy for the system. So that is 2.0 version. So stay tuned and we'll keep talking, I hope, about the future of SARAs and Southeast Asian wetlands through their role as a flagship. Well, jumping over to Southern Africa, let's talk a little bit about another endangered crane species, the wattled crane, the tallest flying bird in Australia. I mean, in Africa. Of course, they're not as big as ostriches, but they are enormous birds, standing about 5.5 feet tall. And we are working in a very special place called the Kafue Flats of Zambia. And our motto is a thriving floodplain for all, much like the Mekong example. It's a huge, wonderful wetland, much like your Everglades there, and it has enormous value for wildlife. This is the Kafue Flats. It's all fed by the Kafue River, which meanders through this big floodplain, spreads its waters widely across the plains, and creates all kinds of beautiful wetlands that are used by wildlife, by lots of big game, like these zebra shown here, and buffalo, lots of hippos in the deeper water. And of most note, on the mammal side, these are lechwe. Lechwe are a very aquatic antelope, much more aquatic than any type of antelope we have in North America here. They feed deep in these marshes. They're highly endangered, as I'll talk about in a minute, and they splash along in big numbers. And all of the world's lechwe are in the Kafue Flats. They're endemic to this floodplain and occur only here. Well, the floodplain also has great value for bird life. Couldn't recommend it more if you're on an international birding trip. It's got more than 470 bird species recorded there. Again, lots of the types of family groups you're all used to, from the Everglades, storks and spoonbills and ibises, and lots of ducks and all kinds of amazing birds. And then other exotic birds like these bustards and pratt-and-calls. It's wonderful. And it's an important bird area, one of the most important bird areas in Zambia, Southern Africa. And I mentioned before, cranes are one of the most endangered groups of birds, families of birds in the world. Probably the most endangered family of birds right now is the vultures. And the Kafue Flats is also a vulture safe zone where there's a lot of activity to conserve several different species of vultures. So it's got a good dual role there. But let's get to the cranes. There's 2 species on the Kafue Flats. The gray-crowned crane is an endangered species in rapid decline, and Zambia is one of the strongholds for this species. So it's a very important place for this ornate, wonderful bird, super exotic bird. And the wattled crane. Wattled crane is one of the rarest cranes in the world. There's less than 10,000, not nearly as rare as our whooping cranes, which only have about 1/10 that number, but one of the rarer birds in Africa, and decreasing, vulnerable species and decreasing. The Kafue Flats has about 1/3 of all of the world's wattled cranes. So it's an area we really zoomed in on as one of our priorities. It has more wattled cranes than anywhere else on Earth. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is this plant, Eleochris, that I mentioned earlier. It has huge, huge beds of Eleochris, which is a tuber-producing plant that they feed on. And then it also is a really important breeding ground. I don't know if you can see that arrow pointing there, but those are eggs. And wattled cranes breed during high floods. They build their nests, and then they hatch their chicks as water levels are drawing down. And then they feed their chicks out in these productive wetlands. So they make heavy use of these wetlands to raise their chicks. They eat a lot of invertebrates and insects during that time. And so they're intimately tied to the ebb and flow of waters and vegetation life on this floodplain. Well, that same ebb and flow makes a very productive wetland for local people too, for fisheries, for livestock, for domestic water supplies, bathing, everything, natural resources. this floodplain is absolutely vital for people too, as well as wattle cranes and lots of other wildlife. And when you look kind of bigger picture, it provides all kinds of ecosystem services that support life, provision us, have cultural meaning, serve regulatory functions. It's typical, much like the Everglades and other big wetland systems, providing many, many values to society. And increasingly, one very important is it's an oasis during times of climate change. The waters that come into the floodplain come from the far north of Zambia and up into Angola. And those waters come down, and even in drought years, you find waters across the plain. So it becomes a really important oasis. Well, that's all well and good. We're excited that it's important for cranes and for people, but many problems have, many challenges have emerged out of the dependence on the Kafue Flats. A big one is the unsustainable harvest of wildlife. That conservation area has been unfunded by the government, and so law enforcement is, to say the least, sort of demoralized and ineffective there. And the community has been sort of disenfranchised from this wetland there because of the creation of protected areas. They don't have a lot of incentive to sustain the flats. So there is excessive hunting of the area for bushmeat markets, animals going out to Lusaka. And all of that has been really problematic for wildlife there. We've just about lost all of the zebra, buffalo, and wildebeest. And when we look at the lechwe, they've been in kind of a free fall for about 50 years. About an 80% population decline. Again, these are found, the only place in the world that they're found. And so we've been tracking them very carefully, and the range has been constricting. Those brown dots in the middle of this map of the Kafue Flats show their current distribution. They used to occur all across that area shown. So there are big problems with protecting lechwe on the floodplain. Also with changes in the water. You're all probably familiar with that from South Florida, but changing in the timing and depth, the duration of water flows as waters are used also for hydropower production and to pull off for irrigation. And that's compounded as well by invasive species coming in. This is the shrub Mimosa pigra. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Uncontrolled fires, big scale fires that occur as the floodplain dries out from those changes in water. And lots of settlements. And one of the real challenges is as people settle some of the highland areas of the floodplain, then during deep water period, they're actually occupying that critical highland habitat that animals like the lechwe need as well. So we're seeing a lot of human wildlife conflict over these wetland resources. And, you know, if one map kind of says it all, this was from an aerial survey. The brown dots in this survey are cattle, and the purple dots are lechwe. And when I was showing before about how lechwe were declining from those outer areas, that's direct competition and spread of cattle into those areas. And there's an air photo of what that looks like. There's lechwe kind of crowded against the waterfront, feeding at the water edge, and then lots of cattle all around. Well, you're thinking, this is a crane organization. Why are they paying attention to lechwe? Part of it is that we work in these areas, and of course we care about all wildlife in those areas, but there's also a close association between cranes and grazing animals worldwide. And both the wattled cranes and the gray crown cranes really depend on grazing activity in this big floodplain area. Grazers open up habitat by grazing down the wetland vegetation and giving cranes access to those tubers that they feed on below the soil, and for the gray crown cranes, insects and other species that they eat. So they really do create habitat. When they're too abundant, like the cattle, it creates other problems. But the grazing action of animals like lechwe is really important for cranes. So it's part of our conservation imperative there. Well, how can craniacs make a difference in a place like Zambia? It's through commitment. It's through an understanding that problems are not solved over time. So we've established an office in Zambia, and we've signed a 20-year agreement, a cooperative management partnership for the management of the Kafue Flats. We signed with the Zambian Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and supported by World Wildlife Fund as well. And it's a long-term commitment to manage and restore this protected area with the communities that use it as well. So we are managing 2 national parks there, Blue Lagoon on the north bank of the Kafue River and Lochinvar National Park on the south bank, and that a surrounding red area, which is called a game management area. And really, it's all about working deeply with the communities around this area to build engagement, build incentives for these communities to use this wetland more sustainably, to find alternative livelihoods and find diverse ways to support them. Some of the scenes shown in this photo, set of photos, we hired 80 scouts actually from the local community. So all of the scouts protecting the wetland now are actually from the local community. So it's an important source of income. A lot of engagement of local community people and students as well, adults and students, in learning about the wetland and helping with the management. And shown in the bottom right there as well, we've been engaging communities in studying these wetlands and helping us learn more about their conservation. All of this has culminated in a community-based wetland restoration project there that I'm excited about. We were, well, when Eric was talking before, he was talking about weeding for the birds. I like that that phrase, we are weeding for the birds as well in the Kafui Flats. We hired communities to remove the shrub Mimosa pigra for about the last 5-6 years, with a goal of removing about 95% of the cover of this invasive weed and restoring habitat. So that's been the project, and we've really had nice results over time. That kind of dark reddish color is the extent of mimosa, and it grows right on the line where both lechwe and cranes access the wetlands. The areas in blue are much too deep water for feeding. It's the green area they need, and that's what's completely swamped with mimosa. So we've been steadily clearing it and reducing it, which has been exciting to remove that shrub. And then we've seen some real results. Waterbirds and lechwe returning to those cleared areas. We had 3 new bird species for Zambia that showed up in those cleared areas. That was certainly very exciting. Started to see the regeneration of native plants, including Elaacris, that's so important for the wattle cranes, and opening up that access to the wetlands. So that's been exciting on the ecological side. But what's nice is it's a 2-part story. And the other important part of the story is how it supported the community. There are 450 people have been employed by the project. And this is a region where people are not hungry. There's not direct food shortage, but there is no opportunity for cash. And people need cash just like we do for lots of things, for school fees, for housing, improving their homes and roofs, business investments, whatever they need cash for. And so it's a real opportunity to infuse real salaries into an area where really it's more of a barter and just growing and living off of crops there. So creating access and pathways to water, and also been able to support a bunch of students through this process. So it's really been a combination both of ecological benefit and human well-being. This one, like the Vietnam story, is still an ongoing story. As I mentioned at the start, our motto is a thriving floodplain for all, trying to build support from the community for this wetland and to restore its most essential functions through a combination of law enforcement, livelihoods, clearing weeds, and whatever it takes to get to that end. So that's another story in progress for an amazing bird and an amazing big wetland. And it's really been thrilling to be involved in those projects for quite some time. Well, I'm going to tell one more story, our North America story here at home. As I mentioned, North America is home to the rarest crane in the world, the whooping crane, and the most abundant and most successful crane in the world, our Sandhill Cranes. And you heard from George, I think, last fall, heard about the whooping crane story. And that is a wonderful story. And I consider it a story in progress. We're not there yet, but we're getting there with whooping cranes. But let's jump to our Sandhill Cranes, which is really a great conservation success story. I will touch in a minute on the Florida Sandhills, which are maybe a bit of an exception to the rule right now. But overall, there's Sandhill Cranes are one of the great bird stories of the last half century. So let's look at that. This is of course, our Sandhill Crane, and this is a map of their distribution across North America, their breeding range in green, wintering range in orange, and some dots for their non-migratory range. I'll just break that down a little bit for you. So there are 3 resident Sandhill crane populations: the Mississippi Sandhill, the Florida Sandhill, of course, which you know better than me, and down in Cuba, the Cuba Sandhills. And I'm not going to focus here on the Florida Sandhill. There are people down there far more knowledgeable than me about these birds. But obviously, the Florida Sandhill crane is quite an interesting story in the world of cranes, a very urbanized bird due to loss of habitat. There's a saying that Sandhill cranes in Florida are all about living with wildlife. They're probably, from a crane perspective, much more about adapting to people, as we find cranes at feeders, in shopping malls, roadsides, and so on. As I said, that's a whole separate seminar about sort of the plight and recovery of Florida Sandhill cranes. There's about 5,000, I think latest count maybe 4,600 or so in Florida that are resident. They are threatened in Florida, as you all know, due to habitat loss and various urban conflicts. I'm gonna focus more on the migratory Sandhill crane story. If you have questions later on Florida Sandhills, I can take a stab at answering them, but I'm gonna focus here on the big migration populations. There's the mid-continent population, which is now well over 1 million birds that moves through the Platte River, as I mentioned before. There's also a Pacific flyway population, a Rocky Mountain population, and a lower Colorado River population. And then the population we focus on the most is the eastern greater Sandhill crane that migrates, and about 25,000 or so eastern graders show up in Florida each year to mix with your, say, 5,000 or so resident Florida Sandhill subspecies. So they all mix together. Sometimes that's confusing for people down in Florida. What are the resident birds and what are the migratory birds? And that's a map kind of showing that population coming down there. Well, we have about 1.5 million Sandhill cranes in North America, and that's a wonderful story, wonderful state of affairs, but it's easy to forget that this was not the story not very long ago. And some of you may have had the pleasure of reading a Marshland elegy by Aldo Leopold, one of the most beautiful pieces of prose about wildlife I've ever written. I think it's absolutely lovely writing by Leopold, the great conservationist. And he wrote, the sadness discernible in some marshes arises perhaps from their once having harbored cranes. Now they stand humbled adrift in history. So why was that 70 years ago? Well, what happened to our Sandhill cranes is a triple whammy. During that period in the preceding century, most of our natural grasslands and uplands were lost, converted to agriculture. Many of our wetlands in the US were lost, especially that red belt in the central part of the country, and certainly up into their breeding grounds in Wisconsin, where we had massive loss of wetlands over the preceding 200 years as well. And market hunting. Cranes were hit very, very hard, like many other species, during that prior century by very, very intensive market hunting. That's also what wiped out the whooping crane. But Sandhill cranes were hit even harder and driven near to extinction. Of course, we lost lots of species during that era, largely to hunting, and we just about lost our cranes. They were lost as a breeding bird, were lost from Illinois, Iowa, the Dakotas, from Ohio and Indiana, and just about lost through the rest of the upper Midwest. Fortunately, we hung on to birds in Wisconsin, breeding birds in Wisconsin and Michigan, and they weren't lost entirely as you did in Florida as well. So we just about lost our Sandhill cranes, much like the whooping crane story you heard from George. But lo and behold, the Sandhills made one heck of a comeback. It's been an amazing comeback, really. So this is the eastern Sandhill crane population, the one that breeds up in Wisconsin and the sort of upper Great Lakes region. And our latest count is tallying over 100,000 Sandhill cranes in the eastern US now. They have been increasing rapidly since the 60s and 70s. They are now breeding, it seems like every other year in a new state to the east. We have breeding birds as far east as Maine and in New York, touching into Vermont, well-established breeding populations in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and then huge numbers breeding in Michigan, Wisconsin, eastern part of Minnesota, as well as northern parts of Illinois and Iowa, Indiana. So what a wonderful story. They're breeding successfully in our region throughout. And we're seeing them, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and, when I started with Crane Foundation in the 1980s, there was not a Sandhill crane in the area, in the Madison area, and there were only a few pairs around in Wisconsin. I had never seen a Sandhill crane in the wild in Wisconsin when I first visited the Crane Foundation, well, now just in Madison where I live, we have crane crossings, crane drains, crane beaches, crane soccer fields, you name it, much like you've seen down here in Florida. They have fully adapted to living with people, and they've hit the most coveted of all markets. They've hit our microbrew and micro wine markets, and where they are celebrated. And that's about as culturally iconic as you can get here in the upper Midwest. Tap in the beer market, and soon maybe the brat market and cheese market up here. And they're even being seen in Chicago. That's a Sears Tower in Chicago with sandhills flying over. A couple of years ago, they made the cover of the Chicago Tribune. Once nearly gone, Sandhill Cranes come soaring back. So it's a great story. Sandhill Cranes really have made a remarkable recovery. They're right up there with our bald eagles, our Cooper's hawks, some of the other birds that have made these amazing recoveries, our peregrines, since that period when they hit rock bottom about a century or less ago. So why did sandhills have this successful recovery across a lot of the US? In a lot of ways, it was reversing the core problems that led to their demise. One was certainly the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which brought an end to the heavy market hunting. That gave them a head start, and that alone was a big part of their recovery. Cranes are still hunted in many states today, as you may know, including in this eastern flyway, but the hunting levels are dramatically lower than they were a century ago, and that has certainly made a big difference. And the other big reason is cranes have converted to farmlands. This is a scene from Wisconsin where we have sandhill cranes and trumpeter swans out using farm fields, and our farm fields in Wisconsin support a lot of wildlife, and they're a big part of the recovery. This is our Culvers in Wisconsin saying, thank you, farmers. And we do say, thank you, farmers, because a lot of the crane recovery has not been in wild places, but in agricultural lands that have conserved their wetlands and allowed cranes to forage in their uplands. And so that's been a great story. And so if you want to keep sandhill cranes successful, how do we keep them successful? Those same farmers. And that's what we focus on now. So a lot of our work for sandhill cranes is around agricultural areas and trying to find real solutions, because cranes have become a bit of a problem species. As I mentioned, we've got about 100,000 coming through Wisconsin now in big numbers, and they feed in agricultural areas. And about 11 months of the year, about 90% of the year, cranes are not a problem. They eat earthworms, they eat grubs, they eat waste grain on the fields. But during the sensitive period in May each year, late April, May, they feed on newly emerging corn, and they can walk right down a row and hit corn very hard. This is a field showing crop damage from cranes. All that brown area is corn that was plucked out by sandhill cranes. And as you can imagine, farmers do not like that. Some farmers don't care when they have big enough lands, but smaller farmers do care, and they can be a real economic problem. So we set ourselves out to try and solve this problem of crop damage in Wisconsin, to try and recreate some harmony between cranes and the farmers that are largely responsible for saving them. So just to note that this is not just a problem restricted to Wisconsin, it's a problem we need to solve worldwide. These are gray crown cranes feeding on crops in Kenya, where you have a clash of an endangered species, the crown crane, with the livelihoods of marginal farmers. So it's a problem. We need a lasting solution for farmers and cranes together worldwide, and especially for our sandhill cranes. We think we have a solution, and that's what we're working on right now. There's a product called AvaPel that we helped create during the 2000s. We field tested it on cranes and helped create a database to test it, and it works. Fields that are treated with AvaPel do not see crop depredation, and untreated fields do. And it's a product called anthraquinone. It's marketed as AvaPel, and it is a bird repellent that really works. And what it does, importantly, is that when cranes taste, it's a non-toxic substance, completely non-toxic. And when cranes taste it, it has a terrible taste that they hate, and they spit it out. What they don't do is fly off to another farm. They just say, oh, that tastes bad, and they start eating other stuff. So they switch to waste grains, grubs, and earthworms, but they stay on the farm. And that's really important because it doesn't push the cranes to another farm that's not treated. They stay on the farm. And so it's a solution that keeps the birds in a beneficial role without chasing it on to the next neighboring farm. So we think AvaPel is a real solution, and it keeps away lots of other things like crows and grackles, blackbirds, and pheasants that also eat the seed. It tastes bad to all these birds. Like I said, it is non-toxic, but it is terrible tasting to birds. By the time it grows up into corn stalks, it tastes fine. It's undetectable for people who buy the corn. But at that critical germination stage, it makes it taste terrible. So that's all very exciting. But there's some real challenges that we've discovered. One is that farmers have to bear all the costs of buying this Avapel treatment. There's no compensation program for farmers. It's very inconvenient for farmers to apply Avapel on the farm because it's not pre-treated on seed. So they have to buy separate bags of Avapel, mix it together in the hopper, and then apply it to the farm. They don't like doing that. It's just one more thing to do. And if they apply it inconsistently, it actually goes down in effectiveness. So those are the challenges we're dealing with, and the solutions really flow right out of that. One is we're working very actively with seed companies to get seed treated at the source, so you can buy basically a bird conservation friendly treated seed that keeps the seed from that has Avapel treatment and is applied at manufacturing. So that helps us solve the problem. We're also doing extension work on farms, which is really aimed at correctly applying the Avapel, but also sort of understanding for farmers, understanding as well that successful Avapel does not mean no cranes on your farm. It means no cranes eating good stuff on your farm. The cranes are staying and eating bad stuff. That's good. So a lot of the outreach is around understanding that just because cranes are still on the fields doesn't mean the deterrent isn't working. So that's an important part of the message. And one of the things I'm really excited about that we're working on right now is trying to create a crane stamp. That's a non-hunting stamp that would support cranes on farmlands and help defer the cost of Avapel for farmers, or possibly support damage to crops that that we don't have a deterrent developed for yet, like potatoes. So right now we're doing a lot of kind of marketing of the crane stamp idea, hoping it'll catch momentum, and we'll be able to implement it in Wisconsin through our Department of Natural Resources in partnership with the Crane Foundation, and try to generate some real support for farmers who support cranes. That's our goal. What's the best measure of success for work like this? I think it's the farmer who wakes up in the morning, or the rancher, and looks out and says, I'm happy with my cranes. Can't think of a better measure of success for Sandhills than that, as their numbers go up and we try to keep them abundant. So those are the three stories I want to tell. I just want to close to say, cranes really inspire us to solve conservation challenges as we work worldwide, help us commit to healthy landscapes that unite people and help sustain our biodiversity. So they really can be wonderful tools for conservation. And just finally to say, I hope if you have a chance to get way up to the Midwest, do stop in and visit us at the International Crane Foundation. We have all the crane species of the world, all 15. You get to see them up close, far closer than you'll ever see them in the wild for most of them, except maybe your Florida sandhills there. But they are they're really fun to watch, having their natural behaviors. All of our exhibits are big and have wetlands and murals and backgrounds from the places where they live. You can learn more about cranes, what they eat, what they do, who's working to save them. Hear about the story of George and Tex, which you probably heard about from George last fall, and other fun stories in the history of Crane Foundation. So it's a fun opportunity, again, if you're ever up in our northern lands, our snowlands. We're open all summer. We're open basically from May 1st through October, and love to host you. You can also join us on an amazing trip. As I mentioned, there is really no more amazing wildlife spectacle in the country than the Platte River in migration. It's starting to happen right now. It'll happen through till early August, where again, you have about 1 million cranes descending on a 50-mile stretch of the Platte River. It's really quite something. So for all you do, thank you for caring, for engaging and taking action, all that you do through Audubon and for the Everglades and all the other wetlands and wildlife habitat in Florida. We're all grateful. We're all one big team trying to save these birds, and I do thank you for that. I want to thank all the amazing photographers that contributed photos through the Crane Foundation to the slideshow. Some of them are mine, a bunch of them are from other people, and I'm grateful to have access to tell the story of cranes through these photographers. And I thank you for joining this evening. I know it's getting late, but I'm very happy to take any questions, and really appreciate you joining tonight. with that, I will unshare.
Yeah. Hey, that was a gorgeous presentation.
There we go.
We're all back. We're all back.
All back.
Yeah, you've got a ton of, accolades in the chat. But a couple questions, I think, there are some that you answered in the course of the presentation. Somebody, Bernie, wanted to say that they're always picking at the soil and what do they eat. But we talked about that.
Yeah.
We have somebody wants to know where in Wisconsin.
It's where are we, or where are the cranes? Where are we?
Where are you located?
Yeah, okay. We are in Baraboo, Wisconsin, which is also home of the circus, the Tournament Bailey Circus. That's our other claim to fame here. It's about an hour north of Madison, but we're actually probably notably just about a mile off the interstate. So if you're going across the country on the Interstate 9094 that goes coast to coast, we're just about a mile off in central Wisconsin. So.
Great. So I expect to hear many people from here visiting that they visit.
Yeah.
Now that they know where it is.
Just 1,000 miles or so away. Yeah. So.
Eric wants to know what are the color of crane eggs?
Oh yeah, most of the crane eggs are kind of a variety of white to beige. Some of them are quite white for some species, and then they can get a little bit brownish and speckled. But yeah, so, for many of the species, they're pretty bright white. Don't know why, but they are. So yeah.
And Eric wants to know, are there craniacs in Canada?
There are craniacs in Canada. Well, we have members in every state, and I think every province of Canada. Certainly, we appreciate the craniacs up at Wood Buffalo Nature Reserve. That's the Canadian Wildlife Service that manages Wood Buffalo for the whoopers up there and surveys them every year. So they're certainly great conservation partners. But yep, we do have craniacs. I know craniacs in Toronto and Montreal for sure. In Calgary, we work a lot with the Calgary Zoo. So yep, they're part of the team.
Awesome. Let me see. Do we have any other questions coming in? Just a lot of thank yous, and this was awesome. Oh, and Eric is super excited because he's in Toronto.
Great.
Well, if there's no other questions, I think we can start wrapping up. I think the presentation was so good that you answered everybody's questions.
Well, I know it's getting late there, but yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you, and feel free to reach out if you have any other questions about the world of cranes, and we are here to talk about cranes. So
awesome. We definitely will.
Yeah. Great.
Hi there, Richard. Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I just want to let you know that Mark Cook, who's actually our previous presenter, said, I'm loving hearing about the cultural significance of these birds. Somewhat coincidentally, today I gave a presentation to scientists and managers from Mekong wetlands in Cambodia on how we monitor and study wading birds in the Everglades. So what a small world.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, glad to hear that.
And there's one other comment I wanted to make. Frank Verney, who's part of a group that helps out at the Lion Country Safari, says their zoo has 2 Saurus cranes, and they have been producing several serval chicks as well. Several chicks as well. I'm sorry, several chicks as well. Anyway, so those are just 2 other comments I wanted to make. And again, great presentation. You had so many people said super program. It was awesome, wonderful presentation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you. And we so appreciate the work that you do at the International Crane Foundation. We know how important the species it is. I can't imagine anyone who doesn't love cranes. I mean, cranes are just amazing birds. I think I emailed you. I was up actually at a state park up near Sebring, and migrating cranes come there, and there were about 300 in the field. And so I just got to get a little closer to get a photograph. And of course, I tried to jump over a ditch and hurt my knee. But that's how incredible cranes are. We just can't help ourselves to want to see them, get great pictures, get closer to them. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. And maybe one day we'll get up to Wisconsin and see you at the facility.
I hope so. Or if you happen to be driving west, go out to the Platte and check them out. It's an amazing. But yeah, please do. And we appreciate, thanks everyone for joining us. I know it's getting very late there, and
Yes,
thanks for
yes.
staying on. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful presentations that we had tonight. Dr. Paul Gray, as a reminder, will be presenting next week. Actually, it was I was out with on a walk with Dr. Paul Gray at Kissimmee Prairie when actually I made that that fateful leap over that ditch. Anyway, to see the cranes. Anyway, so join us next week, next month, excuse me, where Dr. Gray takes us on a journey to Florida's ornithology and an Audubon past. I'm sure you'll love it. And also for our general meeting, when we get to vote on the incoming board members or returning board members, and also on our annual budget. See you next month. Have a wonderful month. Get out there and birds. See those swallowtail kites that have returned to South Florida. I'm sure when you look up in the sky and you see them, you'll be awed. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. Thanks again for joining us. Good night, everybody.
I don't